ChatGPT said Michael had dreamed of this day for months. He stood in the empty living room of his brand new house and ran his hand along the smooth wall. The paint still smelled fresh, and the late morning sun poured through the windows, making dust particles dance in thin beams of light. He could almost taste the promise of new beginnings. After years of hard work as a detective, he finally had a place to call his own, a cozy spot in a quiet suburban neighborhood with neat lawns and tree-lined streets. Boxes lay open on the polished wooden floor. Some held kitchen dishes, others books, and a few contained memories he had packed carefully. Old photographs, childhood trophies, and letters he wrote to himself when he first joined the force. He smiled at a framed photo of him on graduation day from the academy, his badge shining on his chest. Today he would fill this house with laughter and friends, with the warmth that comes when people you care about gather under one roof. He checked his phone. Guests would start arriving in an hour. He had invited old college buddies, family members, neighbors he met on weekend walks, a special few who would blend in without drawing attention. He knew his new home could feel lonely at first, so he made a plan. This housewarming would be a celebration of friendships made over the years and new memories waiting to happen. Outside, the lawn needed one last touch. He knelt by the flower bed and straightened a row of bright marigolds. Their orange petals stood out against the dark soil, and he pressed them gently back into place. He took a deep breath of summer air and thought about his neighbor across the street. Mrs. Caldwell always peered from her window when she saw someone new. She had the look of a person ready to find fault, not pleasure. He hoped she would see this gathering as harmless fun rather than a disturbance. Inside again, he moved to the kitchen. The counters were lined with snacks and drinks, chips in colorful bowls, a plate of fresh fruit, and bottles of soda. He set out glasses for lemonade. He planned to mix fresh in a moment. He tucked colorful napkins next to them, hoping to give a cheerful feel. At one end of the countertop, he organized plates for cupcakes, vanilla, with swirls of icing and sprinkles in every color. He had practiced piping frosting last week, and the results were nearly perfect. He glanced at the clock. 30 minutes remained. He stepped into the hallway and checked the guest bedroom. The bed was made with crisp white sheets and a soft blue blanket. He placed a fresh towel on top and thought of his friend Laura, who would arrive soon. She was his oldest friend, someone he trusted more than anyone. When she came, he would show her the backyard, where he planned to set up folding chairs around a small fire pit. Nights here could feel chilly, and he imagined toasting marshmallows under the stars. He felt a light tap on his shoulder and turned. It was his partner on the force, Carlos, leaning in with a grin. "Ready for this?" Carlos asked. He wore jeans and a polo shirt, trying to look casual. Michael nodded, almost putting out the finishing touches. Carlos gave a nod of approval and walked toward the front door. Michael followed. Through the glass panels by the door, they saw a car pull up. A man stepped out, carrying a tray of cookies. Michael opened the door and greeted his college roommate Jason with a warm hug. Jason had been the life of their group in school, always cracking jokes, always making everyone laugh. He placed the cookie tray on a small table by the entrance. The cookies smelled of chocolate and cinnamon. Michael thanked him and showed him inside. No sooner had they set the tray down than another car rolled in. It was an unmarked sedan. Let it pull into the driveway, and Michael's heart swelled with a quiet pride. Out stepped 3 more people dressed like normal guests, carrying a cooler and 2 bags. They were plainclothes officers from Michael's department. They winked at Michael and waved hello to Jason, blending in like old friends. They greeted Michael with a quick nod. Nearby, Mrs. Caldwell pressed her face against her living room window. Michael imagined her skinny fingers leaving smudges on the glass. She narrowed her eyes at the unmarked cars. In her mind, she already feared best-case scenario. Unauthorized party, too many people, maybe a noisy late-night bash. Worst case, she worried it was an undercover operation or something more troubling. Her phone lay on the coffee table. Was ready to dial. Back in Michael's living room, the doorbell rang again. This time it was his cousin Grace, carrying a potted plant. It had small white flowers and green leaves. She smiled when Michael took it from her, and he found a place for it on the mantel. Grace wore a bright dress, and her laughter filled the room. She hugged Michael and said, "Your place looks amazing." Michael led Grace through the living room to the kitchen. Jason was already slicing cookies in half for people to taste, and one of the plainclothes officers offered to help. Grace teased Michael about recruiting his police buddies for a party. He laughed and said it was just friends. Everyone drifted to the living room and the kitchen, talking, laughing, and catching up. Outside, a few other neighbors drifted by to say hello. Most waved politely from their front yards, but Mrs. Caldwell stood close to the sidewalk, watching. She tapped her foot and adjusted her flower cap. She whispered something to a delivery man walking past, as if warning him. Inside, Michael closed the front door and moved to pour lemonade. He filled a pitcher with water, squeezed lemons one by one, and stirred in a spoon of sugar. The tangy scent rose, and he poured glasses for Jason and Grace. Carlos took one, raised it in a small toast, and said, "2 new digs." Michael clinked his glass. 2 new memories. In the living room, one of the guests admired a painting Michael hung on the wall. It showed a city skyline, a dusk the place where Michael grew up. He told the story of buying that painting years ago, tucked away in a dusty shop. Laughter and chatter wrapped the room like a warm blanket. Michael felt a sense of belonging wash over him. From the window, Mrs. Caldwell watched more cars arrive. One of them she recognized as belonging to a police officer. She frowned. Who would bring plainclothes cops to a housewarming, she imagined. Loud music, a big barbecue, maybe even illegal gambling. Her heart pounded with alarm as she dialed 911. Inside, no one noticed the growing tension outside. Michael's guests moved through the rooms, praising the fresh paint, the clean floors, and Michael's good taste. One guest asked about the backyard, and Michael said he would lead them there after finishing the lemonade. He set down the empty pitcher and glanced out the window toward his neighbor's house. He caught a glimpse of Mrs. Caldwell lifting her phone. His heart jerked. Stepped closer to the window, but only saw her silhouette. He set a hand on his guest's shoulder. "Hey, let me walk you out back," he said. They stepped through a sliding glass door onto the small patio. Flipped on a string of patio lights overhead. The bulbs cast a soft glow over the folding chairs in the fire pit. A few guests gathered around it. Michael checked the cooler sodas, water bottles, and a bag of marshmallows. He smiled at the comfort of it all. He told his guests he would be back in a moment and went inside to make sure everything was ready. In the hallway, he paused by the window, facing Mrs. Caldwell's house. He saw her speaking quietly into the phone. He raised a hand in a small wave and hoped it would calm her. She jerked back inside before he finished. Michael let out a slow breath. His heart settled, reminded himself that this neighborhood would be kind, welcoming. He had trusted them when he moved in, met a few families, and always smiled as he passed. Maybe Mrs. Caldwell was an exception, someone overly cautious, but he would not let suspicion spoil this day. He turned and returned to the patio to finish welcoming his friends. Laughter floated from the backyard. Jason told a funny story about his work. Grace pointed out a bird perched on a nearby branch, and Carlos quietly checked his watch, testing Michael's nerves. Michael laughed with them, lit a few logs in the fire pit, and handed out marshmallows. All around him, friends relaxed into his new home. He sipped lemonade and talked late-morning chatter. The bright sky promised a warm afternoon ahead. Michael leaned back in his chair and felt proud. This house was his. These friends were his chosen family, and nothing would ruin a perfect housewarming. At least that was his hope. Music floated through Michael's new home as the party truly began. In the living room, laughter rose like a soft tide. Plates of cookies and fruit sat on the coffee table, and the smell of fresh lemonade drifted from the kitchen. Guests moved easily from room to room, carrying cups and chatting in small clusters. Michael watched with a quiet smile. He felt warm inside. This was everything he had hoped for. Jason stood near the sofa, telling a story about their college days. He held up a cookie, animatedly acting out how he once dropped an entire tray in the dorm hallway. Grace and Carlos leaned in, eyes wide with amusement. I still can't believe you did that, Grace laughed, shaking her head. Jason grinned, crumbs clinging to his shirt. I swear it was an accident, but the Ras never let me forget it. They all laughed and even Michael joined in, remembering the chaos back then. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Laura and two other friends were arranging snacks. Laura moved bowls of chips into a neat row, while one friend refilled the plate of cupcakes. The cupcakes looked perfect, the vanilla cake soft and the icing smooth. Laura admired Michael's handiwork. These look amazing, she said, popping. A cupcake onto a napkin. Did you make them yourself? Michael waved a hand. I practiced all week. I'm glad they turned out okay. Laura took a bite. Her eyes lit up. They're delicious, she said. Michael felt a thrill of pride. At the same moment, 3 plainclothes officers stood by the window, studying the yard outside. They were Michael's teammates from the department, here as friends. One of them, Officer Nguyen, wore a short-sleeved shirt and slacks, holding a soda cup. He spoke quietly to Officers Patel and Brooks. The place looks good, Nguyen said. Nice layout. Patel nodded. He's really made it homey. Brooks followed the conversation. I like the backyard setup. Fire pit, lights, seating. Perfect for evening chats. They leaned closer to the glass, watching neighbors pass by on the sidewalk. People waved politely or nodded in greeting, all except one. Across the street, Mrs. Caldwell pressed her face against the window pane. Her lips formed a thin line. She watched the gathering with narrowed eyes. She scribbled notes on a small pad, license plates, car makes, face descriptions. Every few seconds, she glanced down at her phone, as if preparing to type a message or make a call. Back inside, Michael moved among his guests, checking that everyone had what they needed. He poured another glass of lemonade for Laura, who sipped gratefully. This is just what I needed on a hot day, she said. He smiled and handed her the glass. Nearby, Jason offered to refill chips for Grace. She handed him an empty bowl and said, Thanks, Jason. You really are the best party helper. Jason bowed playfully. At your service. In one corner, the 3 plainclothes officers had joined a group of neighbors who had walked over to say hello. A couple named the Wilsons introduced themselves properly. Mr. Wilson nodded and shook hands with Michael, then turned to the officers. Nice to meet you all, he said. Patel and Brooks gave polite smiles. Pleasure, Patel said. Nguyen added, Michael told us how friendly this block is. Mrs. Wilson chuckled. Most of us are, she said. We look out for each other. Over by the fireplace, a guest named Alina examined a painting Michael hung on the wall. It was a photograph of the city's skyline at dusk maroon sky, glowing lights. Alina tilted her head. This is beautiful. Where did you find it? Michael joined her. I bought it years ago when I was chasing a case. It sat in my old place for a while. Now, it finally has a home. Alina smiled. It really suits this room. Michael felt happy he had hung it here. Outside, Mrs. Caldwell's restlessness grew. She saw the Wilsons chatting, but she scoffed at the idea of friendliness. In her mind, something was wrong. Plainclothes officers did not attend a private housewarming, not without a reason. She stepped off her porch and onto the sidewalk, peering across. She tapped her foot and whispered to herself, This is not right. A neighbor passed by with her dog. Mrs. Caldwell touched her arm. Tell me, she said quietly, who lives across the street? The neighbor answered, Michael Torres. Mrs. Caldwell shook her head. I mean these people at his party. So the neighbor shrugged and walked on, leaving Mrs. Caldwell in a huff. Inside again, the party energy grew. More guests arrived, old friends Michael had worked cases with. Neighborhood families, and even a few fellow officers in plain clothes who slipped through the door. Each new arrival brought a round of hellos and hugs. The rooms buzzed softly with conversation. Weekend plans, recent news, shared memories. Michael moved to greet Sophia, an older woman who lived 2 houses down. She wore a sun hat and carried a small dish of homemade potato salad. Michael took it. Thank you, Sophia. You always make the best potato salad, she laughed. I hope you like it. I brought my secret recipe. He led her to the kitchen counter and introduced her to Laura. And Jason, Sophia, meet Laura and Jason. They shook hands. Laura tasted the salad. This is perfect, she said between bites. Sophia beamed. Glad you like it? Michael watched them. The room felt full of warmth and kindness. The fire pit lights were now on, visible through the sliding door. He could see his guests making themselves at home. In the backyard, guests. Gathered around the fire pit, Michael walked out to join them. He carried a tray of marshmallows, graham crackers, and chocolate squares. He handed kits to two children who sat on folding chairs. They squealed with delight. Thank you, Mr. Torres, they called. Michael sat beside them and showed them how to roast marshmallows. Soon, gooey treats emerged. Laughter echoed in the yard as chocolate dripped and sticky fingers wiped on napkins. Carlos joined Michael by the fire. He held a cup of soda and watched the children. You've done a good job, he said quietly. Michael nodded. I wanted this to feel welcoming. Carlos waited, then asked softly, Did you see your neighbor? Michael glanced toward the street and said, I saw her at the window. He shook his head. I think she's up to something. Carlos frowned. You think she'll call it in? Michael sighed. Maybe, but I don't want it to spoil things. Carlos placed a hand on Michael's shoulder. Oh. You need backup. Michael smiled. Thanks, partner. Back inside. Jason and Alina had started an impromptu game of charades in the living room. Guests cheering around them, they acted out movie titles with silly gestures. People laughed. And clapped. Michael watched, feeling his chest tighten with pride. This home was full of life. But then, the pleasant hum of conversation was broken by a distant siren. Lights flashed faintly, reflecting off the window glass. In the living room, guests fell silent for a moment. Jason stopped mid-gesture, eyebrows raised. Alina let out a small gasp. Michael's heart pounded. He caught Carlos's eye. Carlos looked toward the door, worry in his face. Outside, Mrs. Caldwell had indeed called 911. Now real police cars, uniformed ones, were driving up the street. Michael could see the flashing red and blue lights growing brighter outside his front window. He took a calming breath and moved toward the door. His plainclothes friends followed him, straightening shirts and badges in their minds, ready to reveal themselves. In the kitchen, Laura looked at Michael. Is that? She began. Michael nodded. I think so. He turned to Grace. Grab my jacket from the hook. Grace did as asked, flying down the hallway. Michael moved to the front door, guests gathering behind him. He opened it just as two uniformed officers stepped onto the porch, voices low. Michael Torres, one asked. Michael held out his hand. Officer Torres, yes. He introduced the men inside. These are my friends, he said, gesturing at the plainclothes officers, revealing their badges. The uniformed officers paused, then recognized their own colleagues. They shared a look, then laughed. The tension eased instantly. Michael invited them in. Neighbors peered from across the street, surprised to see the officers step over the threshold. Mrs. Caldwell, from her porch across the street, stared. Her mouth fell open as she realized her mistake. Michael heard her muttering on her phone as she spoke with someone, probably the dispatcher. She had rung in, but the situation was now clear. A housewarming party, not a crime scene. Back inside, Michael closed the door. He turned to his guests, smiling. Welcome home, he said softly. Laughter broke out again, louder than before. The game of charades resumed. Marshmallows continued to toast. Chips were passed. Music played on. Michael looked at his new home filled with friends and family. The first real test had come and gone. He felt proud. The night was still young, and the party went on. Everyone relaxed once more, sharing stories under the glow of party lights, the memory of the siren fading like a distant echo. In that moment, Michael knew this house had become a home. ChatGPT said, The red and blue lights had faded into the distance, but the air still buzzed with excitement. Inside the house, the music volume dipped slightly as Michael watched his guests settle back into their conversations. The plainclothes officers had returned to blending in, and the uniformed ones had joined a small group near the kitchen, sampling lemonade and cupcakes. The moment of tension was over, but Michael felt a new energy in the room, an unspoken bond now formed among everyone. He moved through the living room, checking on his friends. Jason caught his eye and gave a thumbs up, crusted cookie in hand. Grace waved from the couch, where she was helping one of the children draw with markers on a sheet of paper. Laura stood by the sliding glass door, watching the backyard fire pit glow in the early evening light. Each of them seemed more at ease, now as if they had witnessed something special together. Michael paused by the kitchen island and poured himself a small cup of lemonade. He inhaled the sweet tart scent and took a sip, smiling at Carlos, who was standing beside him. "You handled that smoothly?" Carlos said quietly. No one even seemed upset. Michael shrugged. "I just wanted everyone to know who they is. We're all friends here." Carlos nodded, lifting his cup in a silent toast. "To friendship," he said. Michael raised his cup in return. "To home." Across the room, Mrs. Caldwell had reappeared at her window. Michael knew she was watching again, though the door was closed. He felt a small twinge of worry. He did not want her hovering over every moment of his life. But he pushed the thought aside and turned his attention back to the party. Near the fireplace, Elena was telling a story about her new job. She spoke with gentle excitement as the plainclothes officers listened attentively. The children clustered around them, fascinated by the idea of the police and real-life mysteries. "When I start a case," one officer said, "you learn to pay attention to small details," the little boy piped up, "like footprints." The officer smiled. "Exactly like footprints." The children giggled and leaned in closer, eyes wide. Michael found himself laughing at the children's questions. He stepped forward and said, "Who wants to hear about how I solved my first big case?" Several hands shot up. He motioned them forward. Soon, a circle formed around him in the living room. He leaned against the arm of a chair and began to tell the story. A nighttime stakeout with nothing but a coffee flask. Stubborn determination and a lucky break. Ow. His friends listened, enthralled by his description of city lights, quiet streets, and the moment when he realized he had the evidence he needed, the room went quiet, broken only by the soft hum of the ceiling fan. After he finished, applause broke out. Guests patted him on the back and asked questions. One neighbor asked, "Did you ever feel scared?" Michael paused and looked around. "Yes," he admitted. "But I had people I could trust. My partner, my training, and the belief that I was doing the right thing." That's where it seemed to resonate. A hush settled over the group, and for a moment they all felt connected by something greater than a simple housewarming. In the kitchen, Laura and Grace worked together to clear used plates and cups. They stacked dishes neatly near the sink and wiped crumbs from the counter. Laura leaned in and whispered to Grace, "He's a good man." Grace nodded. "He really is." They shared a warm look before turning back to their task. Michael wandered toward the patio doors. He stepped outside into the gentle glow of the string lights. The fire pit crackled softly as a few guests gathered. Around, holding small roasting sticks with marshmallow ends blackened just right. The sky was fading from gold to pale blue, and a warm breeze rustled through the leaves overhead. He joined the group and handed out fresh skewers. One of the plainclothes officers, Patel, leaned close to Michael and said, "This was a great idea. A housewarming with a twist." Michael laughed. "Yeah, though I did not plan on the sirens." Patel smiled. "That makes it memorable." Others nodded in agreement. The mood was relaxed, and conversations flowed easily. Work stories, neighborhood gossip, holiday plans. Suddenly, Carlos called out, "Hey Michael, come here." He pointed toward the street. Michael looked and saw Mrs. Caldwell walking slowly down the sidewalk, heading toward his house but stopping halfway. She held her purse tightly and hesitated at the property line. Michael felt a knot in his stomach. He excused himself and approached her carefully. She looked up, surprised too. "See him there, Officer Torres," she said in a tight voice. "Can we talk?" He nodded and guided her a few steps away from the guests. The firelight fell on her anxious face. I'm sorry about earlier," she began. "I thought something bad was happening. I was scared and I called the police." Michael kept his tone calm. "I understand. You want to keep our neighborhood safe?" She wiped her hand across her forehead. "Yes, but I realize now it was a private party. I should have asked first." A bead of sweat rolled down her temple despite the cooling air. She looked at him earnestly. "I just worry about everything. I want things to be perfect." Michael softened. "I know it can feel that way, but you don't have to watch from across the street. You're welcome here whenever you want." He gestured toward the back door. "Come join us." She hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you," he smiled and walked her to the patio entrance. When they rejoined the party, a hush fell over the small circle around the fire. Guests turned in surprise to see Mrs. Caldwell hesitantly step forward. Michael guided her to an empty chair beside Laura and Grace. He whispered, "Welcome." Grace offered her a stick of marshmallows. "Try one," she said kindly. Mrs. Caldwell accepted it with a nervous smile, then roasted it until it puffed golden. She took a cautious bite, and a sweet look crossed her face. "This is nice," she said softly. Maria, another neighbor, patted her hand. "Glad you're here," she said. As Mrs. Caldwell settled in, Michael felt a surge of relief. The tension had melted into something warmer, understanding. Music drifted again as someone changed the playlist to a soft jazz tune. The smoke from the fire pit curled up in lazy spirals, and guests returned to their chairs and conversations. Inside, Alina had set up a quick painting station on the coffee table with supplies she brought along. She invited anyone to paint a small tile as a memory of the night. One by one, guests added simple sketches, smiling faces, fire pit flames, and hearts. Michael chose a tile and drew his house with a picket fence and bright windows. He added his initials in the corner. "For memory," he said quietly. Others applauded his artwork, and someone jokingly suggested hanging the tiles on the wall. Someday, even Mrs. Caldwell joined in, carefully painting a small flower. She used green for leaves and yellow for petals. When she finished, she held up her tile shyly. "It's not perfect," she said. Jason stood and said, "It's perfect because you painted it." The room broke into gentle applause. Mrs. Caldwell smiled more freely than Michael had ever. Scene later. Michael walked over with 2 cups of spiced cider. He handed one to Mrs. Caldwell and one to Carlos, who had joined them. The cool air made the warm drink feel comforting. Mrs. Caldwell took a slow sip and sighed happily. "This is wonderful," she said. "I should have joined sooner." Michael nodded. "It's never too late." He looked around at the glowing faces by the fire. "Thank you for giving this a chance." The party carried on well into the evening. Neighbors took turns telling jokes and sharing memories. The children waved magic sparklers under supervision, drawing bright lines in the air. The plainclothes officers quietly slipped out one by one, each waving goodbye to Michael and the others. They left behind smiling faces and a genuine sense of community. When the last guest departed, Michael stood on his front porch and watched the empty chairs and dark windows of the houses around him. The string lights still glowed softly over the patio. He felt a deep satisfaction. His house had become more than walls and a roof. It had become a gathering place, a spot where neighbors and friends could come together even after a mistake or a moment of fear. Behind him, Mrs. Caldwell stepped onto her porch and waved. Michael raised his hand in return. He waved back, then turned and walked inside. The house felt peaceful and full of promise. He switched off the living room lights, leaving only the soft glow from the fire pit outside. As he climbed the stairs to the guest bedroom, he thought about how a day that began with suspicion had ended with friendship and warmth. And that, he realized, was exactly what a home should be. ChatGPT said, Michael woke early the next morning to the soft chirping of birds outside his bedroom window. The world felt calm after the excitement of the housewarming. He opened his eyes and remembered the laughter, the firelight, and even the momentary worry when sirens had cut through the evening air. He stretched, swung his legs over the edge of the bed, and padded down the hall in socks. The first rays of sun had begun to brush the living room floor with gold. He paused by the front door and peered outside. The folding chairs and fire pit had been folded away last night, but a scattering of marshmallow sticks and sparkler wrappers still lay near the patio steps. He smiled at the small reminders. Most of the neighborhood remained quiet. Cars were parked in driveways, and a few curtains fluttered as blinds opened. He felt a warm glow, knowing that his new home had already become part of a living, breathing community. In the kitchen, he filled a kettle with water and set it on the stove. He chopped fresh lemons and placed them in a pitcher with water, recalling how everyone had loved the lemonade. Soft hiss from the kettle reminded him to prepare mugs for tea. He laid out biscuits on a plate and arranged napkins neatly beside them. Small rituals like these made a house feel like a home. He carried 2 mugs and a biscuit outside to the patio. The string lights had been left hanging, casting soft loops of light even in daylight. He sat in a folding chair and sipped his tea, breathing in the sweet morning air. Across the street, Mrs. Caldwell opened her front door and stepped onto her porch, carrying a small box wrapped in brown paper. Their eyes met. He raised his mug in greeting. She hesitated, then lifted her box in a small wave before returning inside. He finished his tea and rose to return inside when he saw her emerging again, box in hand. She walked across the lawn, careful not to trample the marigolds. Michael met her halfway.
Hey.
"Good morning," he said. She set the box on a small table he had placed on the porch. "Good morning," she replied softly. Inside, he invited her in. "Please," he said, holding the door. She stepped across the threshold, glancing at the bright walls and the neat stacks of books he had organized. "Last night, I brought you something," she said, lifting the box. She opened it to reveal a small potted fern and a note. The note read, "Thank you for last night. Feel grateful to be your neighbor. Carol Caldwell." Michael's face lit up. "Thank you, Carol. It's beautiful." He found a spot by the kitchen window and placed the fern where it caught. Morning light. They moved to the living room, where the early sun warmed the hardwood floor. Michael offered her a biscuit. She accepted it and took a small bite, her eyes on the fern. "I'm sorry I judged too quickly," she said, voice soft. "I've lived here a long time, and change makes me nervous. But last night, it felt good to be included." Michael nodded. "Change can be scary, but friends make it better." He paused. "I'm glad you stayed." They sipped tea and talked quietly. She told him about her years in the neighborhood, the block parties, the baby showers, and the neighbors she considered friends. She admitted she had kept to herself lately since her husband had passed. Michael listened, realizing how lonely she must have felt. He offered a gentle smile. "This house can be a place for both of us. And everyone else." She nodded, wiping a small tear. "I would like that." After she left, Michael busied himself setting the day's rhythm. He unpacked more boxes, arranging bookshelves and hanging a clock in the dining area. He placed the fern near the window, smiling as its fronds seemed to straighten toward the light. He felt his home filling with warmth and life. Later that afternoon, Jason appeared at the door, carrying his guitar. Michael waved him inside. "Thought we could have some music?" Jason said. "That's okay?" Michael grinned. "Perfect." They moved to the backyard under the shade of a young oak tree. Jason tuned his guitar and began strumming a gentle melody. Michael sat on the grass, listening as the notes drifted across his lawn. Soon, neighbors stepped onto their porches. Drawn by the music, Mrs. Caldwell watched from her porch, a smile on her face. A few families wandered over with lawn chairs and blankets, settling on the grass near Michael's fence. The mood felt peaceful after the bustle of last night. Jason sang songs from their college days and gentle folk tunes. The afternoon sun bathed everyone in a soft light. Michael brought out lemonade and cookies. He offered plates and cups, and people accepted them with cheerful thanks. Children played nearby, kicking a small soccer ball back and forth.
Oh.
Their laughter blended with the guitar's melody. Michael felt his heart swell.
Ow.
Around him, some familiar from the party, others he had just met. He realized this was exactly the neighborhood he had hoped for. Welcoming, caring, alive. In the middle of a song, Jason paused and motioned toward Mrs. Caldwell's porch. Michael looked up. She held her box of papers, his invitation to last. Night's party lay among them. She mouthed the words "thank you" and gave a small thumbs up. Michael nodded in return. Jason resumed playing, and the song felt like a gentle wave lapping at the shore of their new lives. As afternoon turned to evening, Michael and his neighbors lit lanterns on the patio. They gathered around a small table set with snacks and tea. Jason packed away his guitar, and conversation flowed easily. Mrs. Caldwell joined them, offering stories of neighborhood history and memories of past gatherings. She laughed more freely now, and Michael felt honored to hear her tales. One neighbor, the Wilsons, brought lanterns to hang on the fence. Grace and Laura helped string them up, creating a warm glow against the darkening sky. Michael stood back and admired the scene, flickering lights, smiling faces. Friends and neighbors sharing a peaceful evening under the stars. Michael wandered to the fence and found Mrs. Caldwell arranging lantern hooks. He offered to help. Together they adjusted the strings and made sure each lantern swayed gently in the breeze. She smiled quietly. "Thank you for giving me a chance," she said. Michael patted her shoulder. "Thank you for joining us," she nodded. "I think this is the start of something good." Inside, the fern glowed softly in the kitchen window. Michael looked at it and remembered how a simple gift had bridged the gap between suspicion and friendship. He thought of his own welcome. Gift from Grace and Jason, and how small gestures built trust. He resolved to keep nurturing these bonds. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, Michael stood on his empty porch under the string lights. He listened to the gentle hum of the neighborhood doors closing, distant voices, the rustle of leaves. He sipped the last of his tea and felt content. His new house had weathered its first test. A misunderstanding turned into community. He closed his eyes and let the gentle night air settle around him. Inside, he turned off the lights one by one. The fern's silhouette, framed by moonlight, he climbed the stairs, thinking of what tomorrow might bring. He felt ready for it, surrounded by friends and a caring neighbor he once feared. In the quiet of his new home, Michael smiled and whispered, "Welcome, indeed." The walls held the warmth of shared stories, and the lights glowed with promise. I slipped under the covers and fell asleep, dreaming of laughter, music, and the bright days ahead in a place that was finally home. The morning sun found Michael awake before his alarm. He lay in bed for a moment, listening to the quiet house. Yesterday's laughter, songs and stories still echoed in his mind. Today he planned to rest, unpack a few more boxes, and settle into the rhythm of home. But he also felt a gentle tug in his heart, a desire to share breakfast with the neighbor who had become an unlikely friend. Downstairs, he boiled water for coffee and placed 2 mugs on the counter. He sliced fresh bread and popped it into the toaster. As the aroma of toast filled the air, he folded a small cloth napkin and placed it beside the mugs. A pot of jam and butter waited on a tray, along with a vase holding a single marigold from his flower bed. He poured steaming coffee into the mugs and added a touch of cream. He set everything on a cutting board and carried it on to the front porch. The dewy grass sparkled under the soft light. Mrs. Caldwell's porch light was still on, and he could see her through her doorstep window, arranging her purse. He raised a mug and gave a small wave. A moment later, she emerged, gently buttoning her light cardigan. Her face held a warm expression, softer than he had ever seen. He set the tray on a small table between their porches. "Good morning," he said quietly. She nodded, smoothing her hair. "Good morning," she replied in a gentle voice. He offered her a mug. She accepted it with both hands, and the steam curled between her fingers. He poured himself a second slice of toast and offered her some jam. She spread it carefully with a small knife. They sipped coffee in companionable silence for a few moments, watching as the neighborhood woke around them. Cars backed out of driveways. A mail carrier walked the street, and a few early joggers waved as they passed. The air smelled of fresh grass and coffee. "I thought these moments belonged only to old friends," Carol Caldwell said, nibbling her toast. "But you're showing me a new way." Michael smiled. "There's something special about sharing. A meal. It builds bridges." He gestured to the single marigold. "I picked one from the garden just for today." She looked at the bright orange flower and said softly, "It's lovely. Thank you." They talked about small things, the weather forecast, plans for the week, the best route to that morning's farmer's market. Michael told her he intended to pick up fresh vegetables and maybe some honey from the local beekeeper. Carol offered to join him. He paused, surprised. She met his gaze. "I'd like to learn more about our little town," she said, "and maybe pick up something for the family." Michael nodded. "I'd love that." Later they walked down the sidewalk together. The morning sun brightened the houses and the air felt crisp. They greeted neighbors who waved from their yards. The walk to the market was short, just a few blocks past the cul-de-sac where children scrawled chalk drawings in colorful squares. At the market, stalls brimmed with fresh produce, tomatoes shining like jewels, baskets of berries, and rows of vegetables. The beekeeper offered free samples of honey on small spoons. Michael showed Carol which vendor sold the best basil for pesto, and she smiled as she placed herbs in her tote bag. They talked easily as they shopped, and Carol asked Michael about his work. He described simple cases, lost pets reunited with families, missing bicycles found, and the small comforts of helping people. She listened with interest, asking thoughtful questions. He found himself enjoying her company more with every passing minute. After they finished shopping, they walked back carrying bags heavy with fresh goods. Carol paused at her gate and offered Michael some of the ripe strawberries she had bought. He accepted one and bit into its juicy sweetness. She laughed, delighted by his reaction. "They're fresh this morning," she said. "Picked just before sunrise." He nodded, savoring the flavor. "Perfect," he said. Back at his porch, they set down the shopping bags and arranged some vegetables in a basket. Michael invited her inside for a quick dish of fruit salad. Carol hesitated, then stepped through the door. Inside, the kitchen felt warm and welcoming. He sliced strawberries, melon, and peaches, then stirred them in a bowl with a drizzle of honey. He handed her a small bowl and spoon. She tasted it and closed her eyes in delight. "This tastes like summer," she said softly. He laughed. "That's the point." They ate quietly, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the soft ticking of the clock Michael hung last week. Outside, children ran by, chasing a ball. Their laughter reminded Michael of the joy that filled this house since the day he moved in. He realized the simple act of sharing a meal had turned a wary neighbor into a friend. Carol set down her bowl and said, "I used to think a housewarming was just a party. Now I see it's more. It's an invitation to trust, to belong." Michael nodded, touched by her words. He reached for the vase on the counter and placed the marigold among a few fresh-cut daisies he had bought. "Welcome indeed," he said softly. That afternoon, Michael settled into his favorite armchair. With a book, the sun streamed through the window, and he felt a gentle peace. A knock on the front door broke the silence. He stood and opened it to find Carol holding a small basket of freshly picked eggs from her chicken coop. She handed him the basket with a shy smile. "Thought you might like these," she said. He accepted them with a grateful nod. "I do," he said. "Thank you." He invited her to sit on the porch. They talked about chickens, gardening, and the best recipes for a weekend brunch. The neighborly bond grew stronger with each shared story. As evening came, Michael lit a single candle on his dining table. He prepared a simple omelet using Carol's eggs, fresh herbs, and a side of toast. He set a plate for her, then stepped outside to invite her in. She joined him at the table, and they shared the meal in comfortable silence, punctuated only by appreciative bites and soft conversation. After dinner, Carol glanced around the dining room. "Your home," she said, "feels like a story in progress." Michael smiled. "Every person adds a chapter." She nodded thoughtfully. "I'm glad to be part of this one." Later that night, Michael stood on his porch, looking at the sky. He thought about how far the housewarming had come from the nervous glances and the sirens to genuine friendship over coffee. brunch, and dinner. He felt gratitude for the simple kindness that had transformed suspicion into trust. In the last light of dusk, he flicked off the porch light and closed the door. Inside, he paused in the hallway and glanced at his guest bedroom door. It had held friends through one memorable night and would do so again in future celebrations. He felt that. This house was more than just a building. It was a gathering place for community, laughter, and the small moments that make life meaningful. He climbed the stairs, heart light, and fell asleep with a smile. In his dreams, he saw neighbors greeting one another, children playing, and the glow of a home filled with warmth. And he knew that this place, once unfamiliar and full of boxers, had become exactly what he had always hoped for: a home.